Welcome back. We'll go ahead and get started. It's 2 p.m. So go ahead and mute your microphones unless you need to say something. Close down your email and we will go ahead and get started. For this session, the fourth session of the Adaptation Workbook course, your instructors today are myself, Patricia Leopold, Danielle Shannon, and we also have Maddie Baroli on the line. And so today on the agenda, we are going to briefly recap step number 3, which we covered last week. Then we will jump into some adaptation options and concepts and introduce step number 4 of the adaptation workbook. We will provide an example of what that will look like. And then finally, we will give you your assignment for next week. So last week we covered step number 3, which was all about evaluating management objectives considering climate change. This is the step where you bring together your management goals and objectives that you identified in step 1, and then the climate change impacts that you identified in step number 2, and you think about how climate change will affect your management goals and objectives and your ability to actually reach those goals and objectives. And this is a great way to organize your greatest management needs prior to selecting adaptation actions in step number 4. And remember, here we're only thinking about our business as usual right now and how climate change makes it easier or harder to do our everyday jobs. So once we have identified our potential challenges and opportunities, we then ask you to think about the feasibility of meeting your management objectives under your current management. And this should be fairly quick and easy. If climate change has little negative effect or it has even a positive effect on your project overall, then it's safe to say that you have high feasibility. If, however, climate change makes it extremely difficult or impossible to meet your management objectives, then your feasibility is likely low. And this step also provides an opportunity to go back and change your management objectives if need be. Or if they're not too low feasibility, you can always move those forward to step number 4 and be able to select the adaptation actions that are going to help you overcome those challenges. So hopefully you are all able to complete this step number 3. But if you need any guidance with the content or even just a quick tip on using the adaptation workbook online, please don't hesitate to reach out to your instructors. We're here to help. And then this week, we are moving on to step 4. So in step 4, we will identify appropriate climate adaptation actions that can help us respond to the climate-related challenges and opportunities. And in this step, we have a number of adaptation menus that will provide potential strategies, approaches, and even examples of adaptation tactics that you can select and modify as needed. So let's dive into step number 4. Step 4 is designed to identify adaptation actions that can enhance the ability of the project area to adapt to expected changes and also enhance our ability as managers and forest planners to help guide those changes. So it's time really to map out exactly what you plan to do. Among the things that you have the power to change, how are you going to respond to climate change impacts and uncertainty? How are you going to address your challenges and take advantage of your opportunities? For some of us, this might feel like we're being dumped into the deep end and it might feel like we need some rescuing. And for others, this is the fun part, the reason we got through those first 3 steps of the adaptation workbook. So whatever the case, if you need a lifeline, we're hoping that there's an adaptation menu that will guide your first few steps into climate adaptation. We have the tools to help. You can find several of these adaptation menus embedded right in the workbook, and you can find even more on our website. These menus are an organized set of possible actions that you can pick and choose from in order to address a specific problem for your project. These actions are geared toward a specific discipline or topic area, such as forests, agriculture, or urban ecosystems. And for each menu, adaptation actions are arranged in a hierarchy from broad adaptation options to very specific adaptation tactics that can be carried out as part of a management plan. These menus attempt to broadly cover most issues that you might be dealing with the expectation that you will design your own specific actions. So just like a menu at a restaurant, you wouldn't walk in and order everything off the menu. You'd go home with a huge stomach ache or lots of doggy bags. But what you really want to do is pick and choose the strategies that make the most sense for meeting your management goals and objectives or addressing a specific climate change impact. So you're just picking and choosing the ones that really work for you. Using the adaptation menus can also connect these broad options to specific tactics in order to help you step your way down to an action. Or if you already have a specific action in mind, the menu can help connect it to these broader concepts of adaptation. This might all seem a little abstract unless you're looking at a menu right now, but what this is doing is ensuring that the actions you're taking are intentionally addressing climate change related challenges and opportunities, and it's telling the full story of what you're trying to do by taking a particular action. And then there's the added bonus of just being a repository of ideas from which you can get really creative with your adaptation planning. Over time, we hope that these ideas actually just become second nature as you address all kinds of management projects. And eventually you won't have to use the adaptation workbook. You'll just incorporate adaptation planning into everything you do. Some of our earlier adaptation menus are included in the online workbook, but there are other newer menus available on forestadaptation.org that focus on even more topic areas like wildlife management or tribal perspectives. In the adaptation workbook, drop-down arrows will let you select your strategies and your approaches. You can use whatever menu best suits your need, but if it's not built into the adaptation workbook, you'll just have to go to the strategies website to download it. For example, if you want to use the tribal perspectives menu, we'll go to the website, download it, and then you can complete an offline version of step number 4, and we can give you a Word or Excel version to work off of. Or if you want to keep your strategies listed in the online workbook, you can add your tactic and just note in that tactic box which menu and strategy you're working from. So let us know if you plan on using one of these newer menus, and we're happy to set you up. And Danielle is actually going to provide a lot more detail on these adaptation menus tomorrow during a special session at 11 a.m. So she'll take us on a tour of several menus, how to use them, how they were developed, and much more. There'll be time for questions and answers. So please join us to learn more about these menus, especially if you're interested in some of these other topics like urban forestry, forested watersheds, or tribal perspectives. And you can tune in using the same URL and login information that you're using today. So that's tomorrow at 11 a.m. and we'll also send the link out over email. And then as part of your homework this week, we are also asking you to watch a short video. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but at the top of the adaptation hierarchy, we have these adaptation options of resistance, resilience, and transition. The difference between these options is basically the amount of change that we're willing to tolerate in our systems. So in resistance, we're trying to defend our systems from experiencing change, and this usually works in the short term and with your lower intensity impacts. And then in resilience, we're recognizing that we can't prevent change from happening, but we can help our systems bounce back after a big change or after a disturbance event. And then in transition, we're accepting that the change may be so great that our system's identity might even change as we work toward adapting an ecosystem to completely novel conditions. So as you explore the adaptation menus, try to think about what your main adaptation option is for your project. If you're trying to resist change, rule with the change, or help your systems, realign themselves with a great deal of change. And think about the strategies and approaches and which ones might reduce those climate change impacts, maintain your desired conditions, and think about which other ones might even be forward thinking or new and different, where you're maybe facilitating some change in your local project. So this is your homework. Watch the video. It's really just going to help you understand the background and the potential adaptation pathways of the tools that we're going to use in this step. So these menus help us link our real world tactics to the adaptation options. They help us set the context and rationale for the adaptation tactics that each of us will devise. So you'll get the link to this video. It's in our syllabus. It's also built into the adaptation workbook. And then I think Danielle sent it out in an email as well. And these options, these broad adaptation options, are part of this whole logical train of thought that's helping to connect the dots between our project goals, the climate change impacts, the adaptation actions, and it really shows this clear intention that makes it an adaptation action rather than just business as usual. In fact, as we've been working with different groups on adaptation projects, somewhat similar to yours, we've noticed that the selected adaptation actions tend to fall into three main camps. The first and most abundant category look a lot like the same actions you are doing anyway, but climate change just makes it even more important, and it addresses a specific climate change impact. The second big category is these small tweaks that build off of those usual things you do, but tackle the problem in maybe a slightly different way. And then the third category is new and different actions that may make you a pioneer in your region or need to be implemented cautiously, or uses new tools and science that hasn't been used before. And you may find that you can identify some adaptation actions in all three of these categories if you try. But that slide I just showed you shows that intentionality that, again, really makes it an adaptation action rather than, you know, just the same thing that you do every day. Okay, so how do we complete step 4 in the adaptation workbook? Let's dive into that. The first thing you'll do when you advance to step 4 in the workbook will be to choose the adaptation menu that you're going to work with. So the adaptation menu contains, depending on the exact menu that you choose, somewhere around 10 strategies. And then each strategy has several approaches nested underneath, and those approaches are a little more specific than the broad strategy. So all you'll need to do is pick from those drop-down arrows, which menu are you working with, which of those 10 strategies are you choosing, and then within that strategy, it'll just bring up the several approaches that are under that strategy. So you just select that. And then next, you'll build off the approach to devise that specific adaptation tactic that will work for your needs. So you'll just build off the approach and you're going to include all the details of what you're trying to do. What species, how much, when, where. So you can think of it, if you were going to tell your crew to go out and get it done, what details would you need to give them in order to make sure they did it in the right place at the right time and in the right way? That's essentially what the adaptation tactic is. So an example that I have here is approach 1.4, reduce competition for nutrients and light. So that's the approach that I would choose in my drawdown arrow. And then the tactic that I would write in for my project might be something like removing all the non-native honeysuckle and mulching on site to prevent the spread of the honeysuckle, but then also to keep some of that moisture on the ground. So we'll get that level of detail in there. And then next in the adaptation workbook is to identify the time frame. So simply specify when you can get this done. And there's a couple of different ways you can go about this. You can choose a specific date and time. You can choose a, you know, before this or after this, or within 3 years of this other treatment. So for the honeysuckle example, I might specify that I want to cut in the spring before a lot of new growth happens, get that material spread out on the ground so that it's working for me throughout the summer. So that's the level of detail that I might use for my project. And then next is to identify the advantages and why would you, I'm trying to move a box out of my way. Here we go. So identify the adaptation approaches and tactics, identify the benefits, describe why the tactic is necessarily a good thing for your project area. And so in terms of benefits, you might think about how if you implement this tactic, it actually makes management easier for you across the board. Or a benefit might be that it's one of the cheapest and easiest ways you can address an impact. It might have co-benefits. So if you implement this tactic, it actually promotes more growth in this other area, or just has another benefit. Or your benefit could be that, you know, it's almost a surefire way to get something done. There's very little likelihood that it would fail. And then on the flip side, you're going to want to identify your drawbacks and barriers. So why might it not work, or what kind of restrictions are you facing? For example, it might have negative side effects on a different part of your management. It might be extremely expensive or rely on a huge number of staff hours, or it might have other social, financial, or other type barriers. So you want to get down your benefits and your drawbacks and barriers so that you can set yourself up to then rate the practicability of implementing your project. And so what we want to do here is simply think about, is this tactic both effective? Is it going to do what I need it to do? And is it feasible? Can it be implemented within the time frame that I want it to be implemented? So it is practicable if you can say yes to both of those questions. You have high practicability. And then if there are too many barriers and drawbacks, then you might have low practicability. And rating each tactic is then going to help you accomplish whether or not you are going to recommend the tactic for your project. So we want you to be able to brainstorm as many tactics as possible without immediately ruling them out because of lack of funds or lack of staff power or some other obstacle. And so we want you to create a full list of adaptation tactics and then rate their practicability so that you can, as a final step in step 4, check whether or not you're going to recommend that tactic at this time. And so if you say, yes, I will recommend this tactic, that means you're looking to integrate it directly into your management plan or your prescription or whatever document you use to get things done. And then no, you just check no at this time. It's not saying that you might not ever be ready to implement that tactic, but you'll have it on record as one of the possibilities you considered. This can also serve if you're in an agency where you have to defend or show your decision-making processes. This can show that you did in fact consider certain alternatives, but then ruled them out because of, whatever drawbacks and barriers that you listed. So it can serve as a record, not only for yourself, but for any kind of leadership that you might need to show this information to. So that is essentially how to get step number 4 done. I know that was a lot to go through, and hopefully it just wet your whistle for more information, because we have the video that we're asking you to watch on adaptation actions. And then there is that optional webinar that Danielle will give tomorrow that is going to be extremely useful as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, who's going to run us through an example. But I think now would be a good time to take a quick question about any of the material that I just covered. Is there anything from step number 3 that you're hung up on, or did you have any burning questions about the step number 4? And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, Patricia, can you see my screen?
Yep, it looks perfect.
All right, well, folks, you must have so many questions. You just can't get them out in this, Patricia threw you because you were saving them for the end. So as you have your ideas as they bubble up, please just throw them in the chat, and Patricia and Maddie will be there to help you along. I also added into the chat a little question. We have One thing we didn't include, I guess, in the beginning was or did we did show the full list of menus that we have available, and it is extensive. So I am just, preparing a presentation that will go over like, the teasers of like the big ideas in these menus and give you a little example for each menu, but I'm not going to have enough time to go through them all. So if you just want to let me know in the chat which ones sound the most interesting to you, I will also do a little poll when we get into the meeting tomorrow, and we'll make our decisions then. So for those who don't know what I'm talking about, feel free to go to the link forestadaptation.org/strategies to look at all of the themes and let me know what you want to learn more about. Okay, so in the second half of our presentation today, I am going to run through an example pretty quickly, and then I'll show you how to use the online adaptation workbook in the step 4 step. All right, so our step today, or excuse me, our example today is drawn from the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change Network. And for anyone who's really keyed up on the science of replication and, really likes to evaluate, experiments, take a look at the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change project. It's a really cool network of sites all across the United States that are implementing resistance, resilience, and transition into forest management in a science and replicated way, so a science-based replicated way. So you'll find sites all over, and this project is actually drawn from a project located in Minnesota in the Twin Cities. So um, this is a collaborative effort. You can see all of the really neat partnerships that are involved, and it is located in the Mississippi National River and Recreational Area in the Twin Cities metro area at Crosby Farm Regional Park. Okay, so in step 1, the goals for this project are very similar to anyone who has a forested natural area. It's to create a diverse stratified canopy. They're looking at trying to keep that forest moving on into the future with natural regeneration and really focused on different age classes. Not only are they thinking about the forest, but they're thinking about the co-benefits and have identified some of their goals are to uh, continue and sustain diverse habitats for wildlife. They are, as you might know, based on its location, in a migratory flyway and are just a huge source for pollinator habitat in the metro area. In the Mississippi River floodplain area, they've got this preponderance of cottonwoods, and so they want to keep cottonwood growing on those sites. They also have recreational goals and restoration goals related to bluffs and trails and some erosion issues that they already have. So all in all, this is a familiar story. It's kind of a complex natural area, but very familiar with their goals and objectives. The time frame is 15 to 20 years out into the future. And the site is about 549 acres and receives over 530,000 visitors annually and is considered the largest natural park in the city of St. Paul, Minnesota. All right, so the climate change impacts, they, as you did, reviewed all of the regional climate change impacts and then ranked and prioritized the impacts they felt would have the greatest effect on this site. This is a site that has a combination of uplands and lowlands, but definitely a huge focus on those floodplain areas. The climate change impacts that really rose to the top for them related to warmer temperatures, especially at night. Given that urban heat island complex, they realized that that warmer temperature was going to have a huge impact on this park, especially in the nighttime and in summer and winter. They have already been experiencing heavy rain events and flooding and are seeing that now and expect that those conditions will only increase. On the flip side, they are expecting more drought stress in summer. They started to look at the projected species and habitat ranges for the different trees and shrubs and other flora and wanted to establish that the shifts in hardiness zones would have an effect on this site, which is shifting from zone 5 to zone 6. Now, this area has already experienced several extreme events, and so they highlighted some that they felt would have a huge impact, including polar vortex, extreme low temperatures, wind, in addition to others. And as many of you are grappling with invasive species considerations, right? It's only going to make that problem a little bit more difficult into the future. So as I sort of described in the last step, in step 3, when they were identifying major challenges and opportunities, this is not necessarily a management plan. It is based, it's a plan that's set up for a scientific study. So they focused pretty acutely on the tree species, but you can imagine that they would have additional challenges related to recreational and in the visitorship, since they are, very well sought out by over 500,000 people. But right here, we're showing the major challenges, which are related to sustaining that canopy. They assessed the inventory of the canopy in this area and found that a majority of the tree species are expected to see reduced habitat suitability under climate change. And that includes northern white cedar, black willow, silver maple, cottonwood, box elder, and very familiar to those in the Midwest and everywhere. Emerald ash borer is here, and some areas are just now receiving the blunt, the last the last stabbing by the AB, and so the ash species there are declining. They're not completely dead yet, and so that is something that they are anticipating into the future, is this disappearance of a floodplain species that's critically important to the area. Opportunities, they did find that some tree species that are present are expected to increase in habitat suitability. Woohoo! So there were already species there like bur oak, swamp white oak, hackberry, American elm, and red mulberry. And also the habitat suitability for honey locust, sycamore, swamp white oak, which are species currently found in similar floodplain forests in southern Iowa, southern Minnesota and Iowa, are projected to do well in those places as well. So not only are they looking at what's present and sort of trying to find the silver lining, but then looking out and saying, oh, we might actually have an opportunity to create a really diverse habitat if we look a little further south. Now in step 4, we chose this example because it has a really nice description of all of the different adaptation concepts and ways that you can create tactics for each of those. So here they have resistance, resilience, and transition options, and they chose their menu approaches primarily from the forest menu. Now their tactics are pretty cool. So in the resistance category, they wanted to prevent the introduction and establishment of invasive species by removing existing invasive species. And their tactic was to really focus on that, get the site prepped for natural regeneration and planting by treating and removing those invasive plant populations very thoroughly. In the resilience category, they looked at a transitional, sort of a resilience transitional approach in strategy 9 to favor and restore native species that are expected to be adapted to future conditions. And this is where they're looking at, creating opportunities for the species that will have better habitat that are on site, creating better opportunities for those species to regenerate and grow, while also looking a little farther south at those flood adapted species native to Minnesota and northern Iowa, just a little bit south of this location. And a little out of the box for transition, it's good to always test yourself, challenge yourself, think a little bit about the wild and wacky ideas. They came up with introducing species that are expected to be adapted to future conditions. And so they wanted to very specifically choose species from seed zones much further south along the Mississippi and shift the species composition in some areas to be more similar to areas in southern Iowa and Missouri. Again, this is a scientific study, so take it for that. There are resistance, resilience, and transition plots. But I think that the tactics are really interesting and they really do a good job of defining each of those adaptation concepts. So you can go to the website forestadaptation.org/Crosby Farm Regional Park, listed on the bottom of the screen, and you can read even more because there's obviously several more tactics under each of these big ideas. So maybe there's something there that will help you in your brainstorming journey this week. And lastly, sort of looking ahead at step 5, they did create some monitoring metrics and some ideas that would help them assess the effectiveness of their tactics. And so they will be monitoring the overstory measurements of their species that are planted and really taking a good inventory of the seedlings and saplings that are on site and of the live trees as well. And of the herbaceous layer as well. So they're just doing an intensive amount of inventorying over the years to ensure that they can start to see if a threshold is changing or if one of those adaptation actions is not going as planned. Okay, so maybe Maddie or Patricia could toss the link to that demo in the chat box so all of you can have that and can follow up on that on your own time. Feel free to contact Patricia and I if you're interested in the Ask project, and we'll help to connect you to our colleagues. Okay, so in the final steps of this presentation today, I just wanted to review some of the pro tips to using the adaptation workbook in this section. So first, it really might be helpful just to scan a bunch of different menus just so you have a sense of what menu speaks to you, speaks to what you're trying to do, has the vocabulary that, makes the most sense to you. Once you have an understanding of that menu and you can read a little bit more about it and its conceptualness, then go into the adaptation workbook and get to step 4. And we'll show you this in a second, but you get to step 4 and you'll have a pop-up that appears when you go to create your tactic, and that's where you'll choose from the menu the approach, the strategy, and the approach, and then you'll describe more about your tactic. So that's why it's kind of important to have that good base understanding of what each of these menus are before you just dive into it on the online workbook. But there's plenty of opportunities if you are inside the workbook to get out and start exploring those menus before you determine what you're trying to do. Okay, so this is what it might look like when you're in there. And this is step 4. You will have your goals and your objectives listed above that area. You'll also see direct links out to all of the menus that are currently integrated into the adaptation workbook, and that'll appear in a second tab. And you can interact with those and read about them and see example tactics as well. But some folks, they know what they're going to do, so don't even worry about it. Just go right to add a tactic. Once you click that orange button, a pop-up screen will appear. And where it says sector, you click on that and it'll give you those big themes like forest, urban, agriculture. And once you select your sector, then those strategy and approach down arrows, drop downs will auto-populate. So you got to tell it what menu you want in order to find the strategy and approach. So you can fill in your tactical details, the benefits, the drawbacks, all of that great information that Patricia just reviewed with you. Once you've completed this, you'll move into step 4.2, which is a separate screen. And by default, all of the options are to recommend your tactics, so you can move on. But, for those who want to show their work and say that, hey, I was thinking about climate change adaptation, but I cannot recommend this action at this time, just go through and click not recommended. And it'll give you a little pop-up box for you to, just comment on why you don't want to recommend that tactic. You could say, well, our priorities right now at the agency are to protect endangered species, so I need to do whatever I can, but if for some reason we can transition this area, this is what I would do. Whatever your comment is, feel free to include it in that box and it'll appear in your adaptation workbook. Okay, so Again, lastly, if you feel a little lost when you get into step 4, make sure you find those videos and you find those links to the adaptation workbook cookbooks and any other tutorials. So we're always here to help if those aren't helpful. So feel free to contact any of us. Okay, so that is the end of our presentation today. I want to give you a reminder on your assignment. So we're hoping that you had a restful and relaxing vacation week away from us at the Adaptation Workbook course, but you might not have completed your step 3. So get in there, familiarize yourself with step 3 and complete it. It shouldn't be too difficult to do. Next, kick back, relax, and watch that presentation on adaptation concepts. It's a really great presentation. It boils down all of those adaptation concepts into a nice presentation. It'll take about 25 minutes to complete. Then hurry on over to step 4 to begin jotting down your ideas in the tactics sections and looking at menus and whatnot. And don't forget to complete your homework after step 4 as well. You can find all of this information in your course syllabus. You can find the links to the presentation, links to the menus, and links to the adaptation demonstration project gallery as well. It says complete this over the next 2 weeks, but I think we missed that edit and it should be complete this work by Monday of next week. Okay, so looking ahead, tomorrow I'll be providing a presentation on adaptation menus, and thanks to those who put their ideas in the chat. And we'll review the basics of the menus. Again, I can't go through every single one of them in immense detail, but I'll do my best. Our next lecture is Monday on March 1st, and that lecture will introduce the last step of the adaptation workbook, step 5. It's crazy to think we're already here. So pat yourself on the back, you're almost done. And with that, we'll open it up for questions, and we want to thank you for attending today's presentation. I hope you have a great week. And I guess I should leave it on this screen to join us tomorrow at the optional session. Okay, that's all I've got. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to have us tackle?